Everybody knows me. I'm Ray Kowalchuk. I'm part of Climate Vegan. Of course, we owe a big debt to Pearcy. It was at a Pearcy screening in January 10th, 2015, where we handed around a clipboard and said, who wants to join this new group called Climate Vegan? And Sailesh was one of the people that helped to make sure that Pearcy got to the screen. Sailesh had a potluck yesterday in Boston, and he'll have one tomorrow in Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah.
So thank you for helping to form this group, and thank you, Sailesh, for managing to shoehorn it into your itinerary. Thanks a lot for bringing us here.
Thank you so much. So Ray and Kelly invited me last year to come to Toronto and march to close Donald slaughterhouses, and I was blown away. You have an amazing community here. And I'm so glad that he invited me to come and talk to you. Some of you have heard me before. Let me just begin by telling you that I'm a systems engineer by training. I worked on the internet for 20 years after my graduation. And this was at the time when the internet was a small thing. No one really cared about it. In fact, in 1995, there was an article in Newsweek saying the internet is going nowhere. Okay? Who's going to buy things on the internet? Who's going to read stuff on the internet? You know, these people are smoking something. This is not good. And within 10 years, I overheard someone say, I don't think I can live without the internet.
Right.
So between 1995 and 2005, there was a massive nonlinear phase shift in how we human beings live. And in 2005, I was having dinner with a friend who told me, do you know what they're doing in San Francisco? There are men marrying men. You know, I'm so glad that the Supreme Court of California stopped it. See, at that time it was rare. The majority of the people couldn't even imagine that gay marriage could happen. And by 2015 it was normal. So it's legal in all 50 states of the US. And in 2015 we presented a paper at the AGU, which is the American Geophysical Union. It's the largest gathering of climate scientists in the world. So about 20,000 climate scientists come every year. So we presented a paper in San Francisco at that meeting, estimating what would happen if the whole world goes vegan. How much carbon can be sequestered in recovering forests? And the result was we can sequester 265 gigatons of carbon on just 41% of the land that's available when everyone goes vegan. The remaining 59% is left as is. And that is more than the 240 gigatons of carbon that we have added to the atmosphere since 1750. So we can literally heal the climate. So that was our result. And they couldn't dispute it, you know, because it's just replacing grasslands with forests and adding up the numbers. Anyone can do this and try it out. So a lot of climate scientists came to talk to me after that. And they basically said, yeah, you're right, but this will never happen. Okay? So I told them at that point, I've heard this twice before. Yeah. So by 2025, it's going to be normal.
I can actually hold on to that date. It's not like something so far away that you can't even imagine.
That's how fast nonlinear phase transitions happen.
Nonlinear phase transition.
So we are going from one phase to another. Okay. You know, and then when we reach there, we look back and say, what were we thinking?
Yeah.
That's exactly, you know, if you think about human history, that's how it has always happened. Okay, but we have a tendency to just extrapolate whatever we are facing today and assume that that will continue forever, and then get very worried about it. That's what we always do. And I did that too. So I started working on the environment in 2005 because I saw Al Gore's presentation on TV and I was so shocked by what he was saying. I said, if half of what he's saying is true, what am I doing working on 10 gigabit Ethernet and some faster internet communications protocol? So I told my wife that, and she said, well, if you think this is that serious, go for it. So I studied the problem, and within 3 months I told her that it's far worse than what Al Gore is saying. He's only looking at a small aspect of the problem. It's a far worse problem. So she said, okay, then let's close our company and you can focus on this full time. So that's what I did. And I wrote to Mr. Gore and I said, how can I help you? and he asked me to come and get trained by him. So I got trained by him in Nashville in 2006, November, to give his presentation. And I promised to do that for 1 year. I did that for 1 year, and I got more and more disillusioned in the process. Because in 1992, the US, and after the Rio Summit, they identified 3 major problems in the environment: biodiversity loss, ecosystems collapse, and climate change. Climate change was the third problem. Okay? The first 2 problems were biodiversity loss and ecosystems collapse. So they formed 3 conventions at the UN. The UN Convention on Biological Diversity, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And all these 3 conventions basically were a bunch of scientists getting together to figure out what's going on and what should the governments do about it. Okay? So they started meeting every year. The first 2 conventions, the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Convention to Combat Desertification, they issued reports. And they had goals and objectives. And the goal was to halt biodiversity loss by 2010 and to halt desertification by 2010. That was the original goal. Did we ever hear about these 2? We only hear about climate change. So you ask yourself, why? You know, I like to give this analogy. Imagine that you have a huge lump the size of a coconut by the side of your head and a mild fever, a 1 degree Celsius fever. And you go to the doctor. The doctor examines and he says, well, that lump is cancerous and that's causing your fever. The best I can do is to prescribe Tylenol for your fever so that it doesn't go over 2 degrees Celsius as that lump grows. Okay? Would you then say, could you please make sure it doesn't go over 1.5 degrees Celsius? Or would you say, what about this lump? What are you going to do about this lump? This cancer that I have. Now when you ask him about the cancer, suppose he says, I'll make sure it doubles in size as quickly as possible. Wouldn't you say that this is bad medicine? Right? This doctor is a quack and shouldn't be treating you? But that's exactly how our world leaders have been treating the environment on this planet. They are not taking care of the cancer, they're only trying to address the fever. Okay? And the whole debate between Trump and the rest, the G19 and the G1, is whether or not to give Tylenol to the earth. Trump is saying, no, the earth can take it. You know, she doesn't need Tylenol. And the rest of the leaders are saying, no, we should give Tylenol. Meanwhile, they are both agreed that the cancer should double as quickly as possible. So I saw this happening, and so I started Climate Healers in 2007, December. And the idea of Climate Healers, the objective is to reverse climate change, is to reverse the environmental problems, is to address it at the root. Okay? Rather than dealing with just the symptoms. So within a year, I realized that the one thing you can do to address all 3 problems, all 3 of these major problems, biodiversity loss, ecosystems collapse, and climate change, the one thing you can do to address all 3 of them simultaneously is to go vegan. And I did that in December of 2008. And then I started writing to Mr. Go. I said, please, we have to talk about this. We have to tell people. You know, when you train thousands of people, if you don't tell them anything about the impact of our diet, then they're going to be ineffective as your messengers. So I got 7 of my fellow trainees, so they co-signed my letter. So I got a reply from him basically saying, it's not so bad as you think. You know? So we should focus on one thing at a time. And this is what we are doing now, we're only focusing on energy. So I said, okay, maybe I have understood. Maybe I should study some more. Because I reached this conclusion after 3 years, right? So maybe there's more to it. So I waited. Then in 2009, there was a paper by Goodland and Anhan saying that 51% of the greenhouse gases come from animal agriculture. So it was the #1 issue in climate change as well. I thought it was maybe the #2 issue. became the number one issue according to their calculation. So I realized at that point that it was much more serious. But I also wanted it to be debated by scientists, because it's just one side saying 51%, another side is saying 18%. So I wanted it to be debated. And that debate happened in 2011. So there was a paper written by the 18% side, attacking what Goodland and Hanang had done, and then Goodland and Hanang rebutted it. And after the rebuttal, the editor of the Animal Feed Science and Technology Journal, where this debate was happening, asked the first side, Mario Herrero and Steinfeld and his colleagues, to respond to Goodland and Hanang. And they declined to continue the debate. Okay. And these people were scientists employed by the industry, the animal agriculture industry. So I knew they had some bias to begin with. So at that point I said, this number is the number that we should be working on. That we should assume it is the number one issue. And therefore we should be doing this. So I wrote to Mr. Gore again. And this time I got no reply. So silence. So I knew there was something going on, that nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to talk about this. And you say, are these people insincere? Why is it like this? Right? And I couldn't believe that Mr. Gore could be insincere. He seems like a sincere person. He's trying his best. So, meanwhile, I was working in this village in Rajasthan, India. Because I went to this place in Rajasthan because that place, people are experiencing all three of these major problems in one spot. They're experiencing biodiversity loss because the tiger is already dead in the forest and only the leopard is left now. They're experiencing desertification, so ecosystems collapse, and they're experiencing climate change. So I wanted to go and talk to the people to find what is the cause of all this. And you could clearly see animal agriculture as the number one reason for it. Right there. You can see it. Because they are raising goats, they are raising cows, they are milking the cows and selling the milk, so the biomass from the forest is disappearing with the milk. They're raising the goats and selling the goats, and the goat is disappearing along with the biomass from the forest. So slowly the forest is being depleted, the soil is being depleted. And the goats and the cows eat up anything new that's growing on the ground, so there's nothing for the deer to eat, so the deer dies. When the deer dies, the tiger dies. I mean, it's like so self-evident when you go see what's going on. That this is the number one reason for it. And one of the things I found out there is that the women in those villages, they live 8 years less than the men, which is the opposite of what you would expect. Normally you expect the women to live longer than the men, right? But it's the opposite in this village. And it's true in almost all villages of India. And I found out it's because of what they are breathing when they cook. Because they're cooking with wood. The wood smoke is not only does it have carbon, soot, but it also has all kinds of industrial chemicals from our effluents. So whatever we put into the air is coming down in the rain, it's being absorbed by trees, and the trees are very good filters. So they filter out all the chemicals and store them in their branches and trunks so that they can transpire pure water through the leaves, and they can use the pure water for the fruits, right? So the branches are filled with these chemicals, and the women were cutting those branches and burning them, and they were breathing all those chemicals in. So they deduced that those chemicals should be in the vegetation as well that the animals are eating. So the animals must be storing all these chemicals in their bodies, which means the animal food should be contaminated. So that was the first documentary we did. The human experiment. So this talks about the 87,000 different chemicals that we have poured into the environment without any regulation. And there's hardly any regulation. Regulation comes only when you prove something is cancerous, like asbestos. So they ban that. Everything else, there are 87,000 chemicals that are going into the environment, and a lot of them we know are carcinogenic. Then that gets concentrated in animal foods. So then they persuade us to eat animal foods as we climb up the economic ladder. So we eat it. And then we fall sick. We get all kinds of chronic diseases. And then we fix it with pharmaceuticals. That's what the health. So this entire cycle, this is the artificial growth, the cancer that I'm talking about on Earth. This is roughly 30% to 50% of the GDP of the planet. Deliberately making us sick and fixing us. A lot of people are employed in this. There are about 1 billion people employed raising animals. And yeah, so another 500 million people in all these chemical industries and in the pharmaceutical and healthcare professions. And a lot of that economy will disappear if everybody goes vegan, which will collapse the economic system. So that's why they're scared of it. That's why they don't want to talk about it. Because we are in a system. Everyone is working within this system, and they are saying, we don't want to touch this system. We don't want it to collapse. So what is the best we can do within the parameters of the system? And that's what they're trying to do. Gus Speth, who is the Dean of Environmental Studies at Yale, or used to be at least, he's one of the foremost environmentalists in the United States. He said, 30 years ago I thought that the top 3 environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystems collapse, and climate change. And I thought with 30 years of good science, we can solve these problems. But I was wrong. The 3 major environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to solve these problems, you need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. But who can do a spiritual and cultural transformation? Is it politicians who can do this? Right? It has to be the faith community. Because that's what faith is about. Right? So this is why I started working with the faith community in 2011. You know, it is a complete system change, but it's a system change that puts us in a different way of living, different way of being as human beings. We all experience that because we have taken that step ourselves without waiting for someone to tell us. You know the story of the apple tree in the Bible? So that's the story of separation. So you get kicked out of Eden. So we feel like we don't belong anymore. And I felt like that too. In 2009, I was at a sanctuary in the Western Ghats of India, and it was an absolutely beautiful sanctuary. And I asked the owner, so how did you make this happen? Because everything seems to be in its place. Every animal is doing its thing, and the forest has come back. And so the owners, they were from New Jersey actually. They said, we did nothing. We just tore down the fences and let the animals come and drop their seeds, and the forest came back. I said, is that it? He said, well, no, one more thing. We had to patrol the land and make sure that no human being comes inside. And at that point, I felt very, very small, as if I don't belong on Earth, because I was born in that forest. So it's as if I've been taken out of my home and said, you don't belong here, go away. But I remembered that perfection that I felt in that sanctuary, how perfect everything was. You know, every animal just lives and the forest comes back. And we just live and the forest dies. Right? There's something wrong with that story. Then a year later, my granddaughter in Phoenix. And I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I noticed that my wife disappeared. You know? She was never home. She would just go away to Phoenix. So about a month later, she told me, you have to go see this girl. I mean, she's just amazing. There's something about her. It's magical. So I went. So she was about a month old. And I held her in my arms and I had the exact same feeling of perfection that I had at the sanctuary. So I knew that she must belong exactly as she is. That we all must belong exactly as we are. And that we are not telling the right story. So she literally took me out of my depression, pulled me out, put me on the other side and said, look at it this way. Assume that everything happened for the best. How would you tell that story? So that was 2010. That was the beginning of my change. She literally changed my life. So I started writing Carbon Dharma, my first book at that point. Dharma is what is the right thing to do. And we all know what is the right thing. So it is that alternate story, not the separation story. The separation is we think we are separated, but we really are not. We never have been separated. We were never separated. So that alternate story is in the Vedas. And in that story, children play the role of Adam and Eve. It's a fig tree and not an apple tree. The role of the serpent is played by an uncle. And it's a story that has a happy end. And I think we need to internalize that happy ending. So the story begins with children playing with sticks and stones and rag dolls on the floor of their hut in the middle of the forest. And their uncle comes to visit them. And the uncle says, "Why are you playing with sticks and stones when the cosmic fig tree is right outside your hut? This is an upside down tree with its roots in the sky and its fruits on the ground. So you go under the tree and you wish for anything you want and it will give it to you. Then you can be playing with real toys instead of these trifles." The children don't believe him. How can there be a tree like this? This is not how the universe is built. So they wait until the uncle leaves and they rush to the tree and they start wishing. They wish for sweets and they get them. And they gorge on the sweets and they get stomachache. They wish for toys and they get them. And they play with the toys and they get bored. Fancier toys lead to greater boredom. So there was something about that tree that they did not understand. It grants you what you wish for, and along with it comes the exact opposite. Because that's how the universe is built, of duality. The children didn't know that. All they knew is that they couldn't stop wishing under the tree, and the more they wished, the more miserable they were. Then they get to be young men and women. And now they're wishing for what young men and women wish for. The 4 main fruits of the tree were sex, fame, money, and power. And with each comes its opposite, and the result was more misery and suffering for the young men and women. Then they get to be old men and women. And they congregate under the tree in 3 different groups. The first group says, we were so happy when we didn't know about this tree. This tree ruined our lives. It has all been a hoax and a farce. And they were fools, for they hadn't understood the tree. The second group says, we must have been wishing for all the wrong things. If we could go back and wish for different things, I'm sure we'd have been a lot happier. And they were bigger fools, for they understood less than nothing about this. And the third group was the most foolish of the lot, for they come under the tree and they say, we are so miserable, we wish we were dead. And the tree grants them the wish, and they're immediately reborn underneath the same tree. Because the tree always grants wishes in dualities, nothing by itself. So meanwhile, a lame child had been watching all this from inside the window of the hut. He also wanted to go out and wish for a good leg so he could walk. But there was such a crowd of people under the tree, they pushed him away, so he couldn't get through. So he stood there and he watched, and he saw how the tree was making everybody miserable. The children were miserable, the young people were miserable, the old people were miserable. Nothing but misery and suffering under the tree. And he saw the brilliant cosmic swindle that was being performed under the tree. He understood the tree. And with that, he lost the desire to wish. He was happy with his leg as it was. See, he became detached from the tree. And with that combination of compassion and detachment, he was the happiest of the lot. So that's where the story in the Vedas ends. And then in the Upanishads, which are like the commentaries on the Vedas, they tell you what they told you in the Vedas. They say that wishing child and the watching child are inside each one of us. That's our duality. And the purpose of all Eastern meditation, all of them, is to discriminate between our watching child and our wishing child. And to identify with your watching child so that you can observe your own wishing child and the other wishing children around you with compassion and detachment. Okay? So it makes it seem like if you truly want to be happy, you need to be detached from the universe. Just observe, watch, not take any action. So this question comes up again in the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asks Krishna, why should I fight the battle? Why should I wish under the tree? Why don't I just stay here, meditate upon you, and I'll be very happy? And Krishna says, no, you have to wish under the tree. Because I didn't create this knowledge trees for it to just sit there. You have to wish under the tree. And then he taught him how to wish. Because you see, everybody there was miserable and suffering was because they were standing under the tree and they were wishing for themselves. If you go under the tree and you wish for the benefit of all else, and say, I don't want anything from this tree for myself, then you'll be perfectly happy wishing under the tree and everybody will be happy around you because you're wishing for them. Selflessness is actually the highest form of selfishness. Right? That's the message of the Gita. This is the message of every religion. It's all about teaching us how to be communal, how to serve others, as opposed to just do things for ourselves. So as a species, we are the only species that has access to this knowledge tree. So we should be standing under that knowledge tree and wishing for the benefit of all other species. And instead, we have been doing the opposite. So that's why we have gone through all this suffering. But we are transforming now. Right? So there is a book by Jeremy Lent where he says there are 3 possible futures for humanity. First is a complete civilizational collapse, which no one really wants, no one works for that. The second is a techno split, which is a huge disparity between the haves and the have-nots. Some people have everything and the rest of us have nothing. A techno split, which is where the current civilization seems to be heading towards. And the third is a great transformation of values, where we start being selfless as a species, where selflessness is actually rewarded and not selfishness. See, currently we have the 3 major problems are selfishness, greed and apathy because the system rewards selfishness and greed. Okay? And the system breeds apathy in all of us. They program you so that you're apathetic. So we really have to build an alternate system. So what is the story we can tell which makes us do that? So I came up with the idea of the caterpillar turning to the butterfly. Because the caterpillar is a blind consumer, right? The first thing he does when he comes out of the egg is eat the shell of the egg he came out of. Then he eats the leaf that the egg was on. Then he eats every leaf he sees for the next 2 weeks, voraciously. Then he becomes too big for his skin. And when he becomes too big for his skin, there are changes that happen inside the caterpillar. New cells are born, called imaginal cells. At first, the caterpillar's immune system thinks these imaginal cells are foreign cells. So it fights them. It tries to kill them. Just like we have been attacked in the past. Right? And then, the imaginal cells become more and more numerous. And the immune system gives up. So the caterpillar builds a cocoon around himself, hangs under a twig and meditates for a week.
I'd love to do that.
And within the cocoon, these imaginal cells start clumping together to form different organs of the butterfly. And when the butterfly is born, the butterfly is a very discriminating consumer. She's only sipping nectar from the flowers. She's not eating leaves anymore. And as she sips nectar from the flowers, she's pollinating the flowers. She's regenerating life, undoing the damage that happened in the caterpillar phase. And that is what we are heading towards. Okay? We have been fought, you know. We are the imaginal cells of the world, okay, of humanity. And at first they didn't like us. Right? Vegans were always shunned. Now there are more and more of us, and now they're building vegan restaurants for us. So the system is beginning to accept us, saying, okay, maybe we cannot stop these guys. Now you have to work with them. Now we have to clump together to form different organs of the butterfly. So we have to really form communities where we figure out what is this new system that rewards selflessness, that rewards generosity and not greed. And where people are activists, you're going out there and cleaning up the ocean. There's so much to clean up. All those chemicals that we have put into the environment, we need to sequester them in trees. The trees are the best way to sequester all of them. And then we need to change all our processes so that we now start creating processes that are harmless to animals, because we are serving them. That's our job. Anyway, thank you very much. I mean, I've been going around talking about this. So, I throw the floor open for questions, discussions. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. What is carbon yoga all about? Can you tell us about that?
Dharma is what is the right thing to do. Yoga is how do you go about doing it. It's about coming into alignment. Let me give you an example. I was at a school in Marrakesh, Morocco, talking to 250 children, high school students. And I asked them, so how many of you are vegan? Only one child raised his hand. Out of 250 students and 30 teachers, there's only one child that was vegan. And I knew he had to raise his hand because everybody was looking at him. Then I asked them, how many of you would deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily? And nobody raised their hands. Nobody raised their hands. I told them, by definition, all of you are vegan. Because that's the definition of veganism. Because that's who you are. You have compassion at the very core of your being. You are made in the image of God. Believe it. Except who you are and what you do are not in alignment. And yoga is about bringing that into alignment. So at that point I had their attention. And I'm sure their parents had their attention that evening. So, yes.
I know you're saying that the faith communities are the ones that will bring people together
They should.
to help shift perception. But I'm wondering what you think of with the art community and theater and
Right.
storytelling and where that fits in.
I mean, these are all tools that we have, right? But I'm suggesting to the faith community that this is the time for them to become more relevant and to align themselves, with what they're saying. Because so far in Durban, 40 interfaith leaders from all faiths signed a declaration at the climate change meeting, COP17. And that declaration was just two sentences, two-sentence addendum. It said, while climate change is a symptom, the fever that the earth has contracted, the underlying disease is the disconnection from creation that plagues human societies. And we, the undersigned, pledge to heal this disconnection by promoting and exemplifying compassion for all creation in all our actions. And everybody signed it, saying compassion for all creation is at the core of our faith.
Wow.
Everyone agreed that it's at the core of their faith, including Archbishop Desmond Tutu signed it. Then a week later, I got a call from his office saying, Desmond is concerned that he signed your addendum. I said, why? Because did he sign on to go vegan? He loves his chicken too much. He loves his chicken too much.
Wait, if he loves the chicken, he wouldn't eat it.
Right. When what you say and what you do are not in alignment, you suffer. And you cause suffering to others. That's the source of all suffering. Any misalignment is the source of all suffering. Okay? So, unfortunately, he is suffering. The Pope also said, right? It's contrary to human dignity to cause animals to suffer or die needlessly. He wrote that in the Laudato Si. And then he was reported to have eaten a veal and lobster dinner in New York City. So he clearly is not doing what he's saying. When what you say and what you do are not in alignment, I know you're suffering.
Well, the Dalai Lama is the same.
Yes. So all leaders have to now come into alignment. Okay. We are doing the movie follow up to What the Health. Kip is calling it Cow Spiritual.
I like that.
And the idea there is to talk to these leaders and ask them questions like this. So lead them to understand themselves that they are not in alignment.
Are there any world spiritual leaders that are vegan?
Yeah.
Thich Nhat Hanh.
Thich Nhat Hanh.
Oh, right.
But he doesn't really have a position of leadership, he's just well respected.
He's got a position of a truth. Buddhism really appeals to me, and I read a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh's books. So anybody who actually follows Buddhism, I think, considers him the true Buddhist leader, as opposed to the hypocritical Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
No, he's just not in alignment yet. So like every one of those kids in Marrakesh,
Sorry,
they were not in alignment, right? So once you know you're not in alignment, you want to come to alignment. You will never change who you are. You have to change what you do to match up with who you are. Because once we realize we are not in alignment, that's a seed that will keep growing within them. So they have to bring it into alignment.
You think the Dalai Lama will go vegan?
Eventually, everyone will.
Yeah.
I tell people by 2026, 2025, 2026, everyone will be vegan. Okay? And I'll explain to you why. Because between 1970 and 2010, 52% of all wildlife got destroyed. 50% of all wild vertebrates got destroyed in biomass. So human population doubled between 1970 and 2010, and human per capita consumption doubled. So our overall impact on the planet quadrupled. So if you take an exponential curve that has increased by a factor of 4 in 40 years, and you extrapolate that out and ask yourself, how many more years can we do this before we wipe them all off the face of the earth? It's 2026. Okay, that was my calculation. And when I did that calculation in 2014, right after this result from the World Wildlife Fund came out, I was so shocked that I kind of blurted out at a public function that's unacceptable. In fact, my granddaughter was born in 2010, and she'll be 16 years old in 2026. And she was in the audience, so I said, I'm going to make a pledge to her that by 2026 there'll be more wild vertebrates than when she was born in 2010. And everybody stood up and clapped. Because we don't want this to happen. Okay? None of us want this to happen. So if none of us want this to happen, why is it happening? Because we are being forced by the system to do that. So we have to build an alternate system, right? That's the conclusion I came to. So, but I thought maybe my calculations are wrong, so I'm going to wait and see what the result in 2016 would be, right? So 2016, it came out in December of last year, that between 1970 and 2012, 58% of all wild vertebrates disappeared. So we are losing them at 3% per year, which does work out to 2026, just a linear extrapolation. So we are going to change. We're going to change.
Or we die.
Question.
We're going to change. There's no question we're going to change. Because there'll be more and more pressure on people who haven't changed. Because they're seeing the destruction. We'll see the destruction happening.
Aren't they saying there's a point where there is no turning back? Like, oh, we realize it now, but oh, it's too late.
We haven't passed that
There's
point?
always a way back. Right? That's the way. When I tell people, even if you wait till 2026 before you go vegan, you'll be doing it with Donald Trump and Sarah Palin. Right? But if you wait until then, and even if we wind up killing all the animals, you'll be looking at every last remaining animal and treating them as precious. That's the state we need to get to anyway. We need to treat animals as precious. Right? We will get there at some point. The sooner we get there, the better off we are. The easier it will be for us in the future. So it's a matter of education. It's a matter of telling people and then giving them an alternative that works. Right now they don't see an alternative. A friend of mine told me they feel like they're in a leaky canoe, right? And we should keep going for another 15 years before it sinks. So we might as well stay in the canoe instead of just toppling it over right now. That's what they're afraid of. That the system will fail and topple over.
That's a terrible story. You have better stories than that.
Yeah. Yes, I know. I have a Facebook page that says Vegan World 2026.
Have you published your calculations and brought forward the findings of like the 2026 being the point that you think is...
Right. Well, I've written about it. People have written about it. George Monbiot has written about it. He has even said, if this is not the point at which we say stop and change, when are we going to do this? This was 2010. Now we are in 2017. At 3% per year, we are down to 73% gone.
I'm sorry, 73% gone as of this year.
As of this year, yeah.
Wow.
So is that 73% all wildlife species, like even species in the ocean as well?
Yes, wild vertebrates. So all wild vertebrates. So it's a comprehensive survey of about 3,400 different species, birds, land animals, river fishes, river animals and sea animals put together. There is a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2008 by Professor Anthony Barnowski of Berkeley. He's a paleobiologist. So he estimated that the total biomass of all wild animals, wild megafauna, animals greater than 25 kgs in average weight, 10,000 years ago was 200 million metric tons.
Took all of the animals that are larger than 25 kilos and put them on a giant weigh scale.
10,000 years ago, 10k years ago, so he had 200 million metric tons of wild animals. And human beings were tiny. 10,000 years ago, our population was maybe less than 1 million metric tons. So by 1970, these guys were down by at least 60%. Right? So they were down to about 80 million wild animals. And then human beings and our domestic animals. So we were nothing, maybe 1 million. By 1970, we were 200 million metric tons. And these guys were 400 million metric tons. One species weighed as much as all the wild animals from 10,000 years ago, and our farmed animals weighed double our weight. By 2010, they were down 52%, so something less than 40 million. And we were like 450 million. We are now at 500 million, okay? Because we are in 2017 now. And these guys were about 1,200. So they are 6 times the weight of all the wild animals that used to live 10,000 years ago. The weight, 6 times the weight. We are double the weight, more than double the weight. Now, they are actually eating 5 times as much food as we do.
Only 5.
5 times as much food as we do. Even though they weigh twice as much, little over twice as much, right? We 2.5 times as much, but they eat 5 times as much food as we do. The reason is that they're all young animals. They're all babies growing. So they're eating much more than their weight alone would indicate.
And only 40 megatons of wild animals.
And we are wiping them out at 2.5 million metric tons are disappearing every year. So I use the analogy of a weightlifter who's lifting 5 times his weight above his head, discovers that he's on quicksand and he's sinking. Knowing that his weight alone is too much for the quicksand to bear, what is the first thing he should do?
Drop the weight.
Chuck away.
People say, oh, no, get a liposuction. I said, come on, you don't talk about population first, talk about dropping the weight first. And then let's figure out a system that's compatible with the vegan world, that has equality built in from the outset. Okay? And then suddenly our population will decline automatically. Because the first thing you need to do as a weightlifter is to drop the weight. No brainer.
And the liposuction becomes the model for addressing population growth first. You mentioned liposuction as an option,
Right.
which obviously is ridiculous in that situation.
Right, right. So when you quote that analogy, they agree that population reduction should not be the first thing to do, right?
Right. We have about 7 billion humans on the planet, but about 70 billion animals are slaughtered every year, farm animals.
Right.
So that's 10 times as much, but they're not eating 10 times as much as we weigh.
Yeah, because most of them are chickens, right? Yeah, they're very
right,
small.
Okay, yeah, right, 61, yeah.
Yeah. And besides, if you look at population at any given point, there are only about 20 billion animals.
Okay.
Because 70 billion is how much we kill in a year.
In a year, yeah. Okay, yeah.
See, the reason wild animals are going down exponentially, scientists, ecologists, they are still using, they call it the predator-prey model. In the predator-prey model, as the prey declines, the predator also declines in population. So in that model, eventually you'll reach a balance, and then you come back again and so on, right? So they're using that model for modeling humans and nature. And I wrote to that professor and I said, wait a minute, that's not how humans are dealing with nature, okay? They're actually deploying GPS technologies and big data software to catch the last remaining fishes in the ocean. So they're catching as much fish as they really need to meet the demand. These are corporations. They don't care, right? It's all about money. So they're catching the last remaining fishes in the ocean. So we're going to keep declining like this until we hit zero. And so they have no way to model that. They don't know how to model that. He said it's too complicated.
Wait, do you think that's why people are really going to be vegan? That we're going to run out of food? Like non-vegan food?
No, what I'm saying is vegan population is also increasing exponentially, right? So the idea is to amplify that as fast as possible. This is why I come and talk to vegans first, because we all have to become, points of light for others. We have to go out into our community and talk to people about these things so that they understand the new way of telling the story, right?
See, I like how you say that because your point from the spiritual aspect, which I don't disagree with, but I feel like spirituality in general, or at least organized religion, like you seem to refer to, is, my understanding, is on the decline, especially with the younger generation. So really, I think it comes from the individual, like myself and everyone else here, to really spread the message. So it's not that I disagree that religion or organized religion is one of the avenues, but really I think the main is on an individual level. What is my sphere of influence, and then who does my sphere influence, and it exponentially spreads out that way. That's where I see the change coming from.
But if your sphere includes a minister or a church or a temple, please go and talk to them first, because they can have tremendous influence within the community right away. They're very good at doing grassroots change. You know?
And the next Parliament of World Religions is happening here in Toronto this year.
Oh, really?
And I think we should have a presence there.
Right.
Wow, that's great.
I'm going to look that up right now.
May I ask, what do you say to Christians at this point? Because I've talked to so many of them, and they're always just saying, God allows us to eat this meat. They know everything's wrong. They can agree with everything, but then they'll sit there and say, well, God allows us to do this. In the Bible, there are things that would contradict that, but they still don't believe you.
I would say, don't worry about them. Go talk to the progressives who should be making that change first. The progressives who are open to ideas, open to new ideas. Convince them to change first, because others will come along eventually. They'll come along because the whole world is moving that way, right? It's like the internet, or it's like touch-tone phones. I mean, there are people who still were using rotary phones, and they stopped because they couldn't buy another one, and it broke. So this is why I want to talk to the Unitarian churches, people who are progressive in their outlook, and get them to move forward.
You said about this, the declaration that you had religious leaders sign that would not support the unnecessary killing of animals. Isn't part of the problem, though, that people in general, as well as religious leaders, if they are people, they do not understand that it is not necessary to kill animals to survive. They actually, the work of Dr. Melanie Joy comes to mind, where she says that the vast majority of people in the world believe that eating meat is 3 N's, I think she calls it, natural, necessary, and normal. Or Tobias Lenhart says most people eat meat because most people eat meat. How do we get through to people that it isn't natural, that it isn't normal, that it isn't necessary to harm animals or to eat meat?
For instance, the Pope's statement is what you're referring to. Because the Pope basically said, it's contrary to human dignity to cause animals to suffer or die needlessly.
Needlessly, exactly. If you talk to most people, they would say that's wrong.
When I ask that question, would you deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily? They say, of course not, right? And then you tell them scientifically, like the American Diabetic Association has said, that it's unnecessary to eat animal foods of any kind at any stage of your life cycle. So I always follow with that. So then it's up to them to say, I don't believe that's science, right?
That happens.
That happens. But they are yelling at others for not believing climate science, right? But they don't believe nutrition science. So they are stuck in a bind at that point. So this is how you get them to think about their own statements. It's not up to us to, beat them on the head. It's to get them to think on their own.
So what kind of actions do you think the best to try to get in and do talks in churches, or do potlucks, food outreach, or is it a bit of everything? Like, what have you found to be the most successful in reaching people?
It's all of the above.
All of it,
Yeah, there are a lot of us now, and so we can try different things. There is a summary of the Bhagavad Gita. Do your best and leave the rest. So do your best. See what is effective and just let it go. If it doesn't work, move on to try another one.
So last year, they were saying in Paris they couldn't put in veganism because it would infringe on the rights of First Nations people and their ability to hunt and live in their culturally appropriate ways. And for me, I know a lot of people who follow that spiritual path. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice there.
Everyone has their own cultural baggage. We all come with our own cultural baggage. Our culture, in Hindu culture, it was all about drinking milk, right? So, and we, and it's part of our DNA almost. We have to drink milk. And in 2008, I discovered that drinking milk was the worst thing I could do to the environment, and I quit, right? So we are all evolving from our culture. It's a cultural transformation, as well as a spiritual transformation. So we have to transform ourselves, that's a spiritual transformation. We have to transform how we live, how we relate to the other species on Earth. So that's a cultural transformation.
The real challenge with reaching Aboriginal cultures here, though, is that they have been egregiously oppressed.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just on a level I just
Can't
even, there are no words, right? So it's really challenging as somebody with less privilege than my neighbor, but certainly a lot more than any Indigenous person in this country, just to find the right language to reach them. Like, do you have any?
Let me please come in here as someone who's done work on the front lines with Indigenous land defenders. The first way to do it is for us to do it and in our language to do it. And that is, and I've been trying to tell this to everybody, but it's always like, oh no, we don't have time for this, right? We don't have time to realize that colonialism was where the settlers came over, knocked down all the forests, killed the animals, killed the buffalo, killed the people, put up farms, started raising crops, and then putting animal agriculture on the land.
Right.
That's the first thing. But the second thing is that when we meet, right, like most of the other groups that I am a part of, when we meet, there's a land acknowledgement before anything's actually said. And that land acknowledgement is like, so you just said Aboriginal people, and then you just said Indigenous people, and you were well-meaning with that. But we have to acknowledge there's a space between what we know and what we're trying to do. And the thing is that they're not Canadian people, they're not Indigenous people, they're not Aboriginal people, they are sovereign nations that are on this land that existed before we came here. So right now, okay, we're a few stories up, but we're on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Iroquois, the Seneca, and the most recently displaced group was the Mississaugas of New Credit. So that means you have to acknowledge the territory that you are on. And if I could tell this to vegans, like I've told it before, I can't be alone in being the person who says this to this community, that we have to start acknowledging colonial genocide, and that our presence here is having been benefited from that dispossession and that theft. Like, we're talking about spirituality here. One of the greatest things that gets me down is I feel like a vegan in a room full of meat eaters when I tell vegans that we have to acknowledge that veganism isn't enough. We have to be part of decolonization. And decolonization recognizes the roots of violence. So, for example, if we were to tell an Indigenous person, don't hunt,
right.
Basically it's like me saying I'm a settler and I'm telling you what to do like we did all the time. That Indigenous person would be just as valid in telling me, get off this land, go back to Europe, go back to where you came from. they would be right and I would be right as well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that
You're going to solve any problem.
we're going to solve any problems that way. So
And I think we already acknowledge that, which is why I was asking,
Yeah.
how do we make that approach?
Right.
well, I think the first example is like you can join me in insisting on when we gather as vegans, like we did with this hand holding, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't participate in that hand holding, is that if we really want to be successful with actually fixing the earth, we can't see veganism in isolation from the systems
Right.
that you were talking about, and one of those systems is ongoing colonization. So
Well,
like
and the oppression of women and other
Exactly.
people of color,
Right.
absolutely.
yeah. So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
first thing we can do is we can make a point of acknowledging it before all of our meetings and before all of our actions. It's just like you would do a safety word or another thing. You would just say like, look, we just need to acknowledge this. So I'm so
So
glad
our
that you brought this
acknowledgement
up.
will help indigenous people?
No,
Is
it
that
will help.
veganism?
It will no.
Oh.
It will help us acknowledge the violence that we continue, the
Right.
violence that we
But
benefit
everybody's
from.
acknowledging.
I think we've all
Everybody who
acknowledged
is
that.
a vegan
We're trying to
acknowledges.
No,
I don't
not
know
at
why
all.
you're
Not
saying
at
this.
all. If you don't actually say it beforehand, if you don't actually say it
You
every
don't
time
need
you
to say it.
you don't need to say it. There you
If
go.
you-
It's like
No,
always with the
there's-
racism.
No,
Why is racism if we all want to dismantle the
Ag-
status quo? That includes.
so there is.
You've got to say
so
it.
there-
Got to acknowledge
That's
it.
just theater, just
No.
saying it. You
Zach
have
has
to
a-
act on it, not say it.
No, Zach has a valid point, and there are lots of systems of oppression that we've all been under. Rousseau said, "He who is a master of others is more a slave than they." So the master also suffers along with the slave in that master-slave relationship. It's just a total system of oppression and suffering, misery and suffering that we've all been under. But so we have to tell a story where we had to do that for a reason. There's a reason that we had to do that, right? Because everything the elephant does in the forest helps the forest. The elephant just walks around and helps the forest. The elephant eats jackfruit and helps the forest. Because he poops the jackfruit seeds at the other end. New trees are born. So why do we think that we are separate? That we are a different species compared to all other species? So we have to first acquire that humility, that we are really tools of nature. We are also part of nature. We are also tools of nature. We know all the imbalances that are happening. We know some of the things we need to do. Because why do we have that many farmed animal slaves who are suffering so much for us, right? So that's one of the first things you identify.
Isn't there also things that we can learn from the indigenous communities about?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, that just learn from their no particular desire to enslave animal species. They don't really have any sort of a cultural history of that.
Right.
I just wanted
So-
to clarify, the people I was talking about were all settlers. They're not First Nations people.
Right.
But they're, I guess it's cultural appropriation that they're taking their spiritual ways. But if they're using, they get to hunt, so I should be able to eat cows that have
Right.
been in factory farms.
And
Right.
they use a leather drum, I'll use a leather drum.
Right,
So,
right.
Yeah.
You're really right. Meat eaters go, native people hunt, so therefore I can have KFC. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
logic. It doesn't. It's no better than that logic. There's a group of vegans called Kablona Keepers that stood on the front lines with indigenous people to protect forests from mining companies and exploitation. And you know what they said? They said, look, we're not going to participate in the fact that you're hunting. We're not going to like it. But we're going to stand with you in protecting this land for the wild animals. Like, I would suggest, don't talk to me about this. If you really want to get to something about it, talk to an indigenous vegan in our
Right.
animal rights and indigenous community.
Right.
If I can make a suggestion of someone to watch, her name's Margaret Robinson, and she's a vegan Micmac.
Okay.
And I really learned a lot from her in how she has transcended being a vegan Micmac and following the traditions and her interpretation of how you can keep like the traditions and still be vegan.
What's
And
her name again?
Margaret Robinson.
Yeah, she's on Facebook.
I think she's great.
How do we connect with Indigenous people
I
in
would
a
say
respectful
correct. I mean,
and sincere?
right. So the best way is to live yourself, set an example, and then they will ask you. Okay? And they are not the first ones that we should be talking to. We should be talking to those who have lots of choices. Now,
What I did was I went out and I sought as many Indigenous people on Facebook that were vegan that I could, and now I'm learning from them. And they're the ones that I have connected up with are very artistic, and they're very poetic, and they're very intelligent. But that was the thing that I thought, what can I do to make myself feel better? So that's what I've done.
thank you so much. That's an excellent response, because you are basically reaching out and recognizing that there is something there that you need to improve yourself. Right?
Yes.
And it's always the case. When we feel uncomfortable with something, it's bringing up something within us that needs to be improved.
I was quite impressed how into it, the veganism that they are, and they don't have
It's about love.
drum skins for the
Veganism
animals.
is
They
about
don't believe
love,
in
right?
them. But I also know that they really need our support. Not so much confidence as we have, and they don't have the community, vegan communities that we have.
They don't have clean water.
No, they don't have clean water, and that's a huge issue. That needs to be addressed right away, more than anything, probably,
And food insecurity is one of the major issues.
Right. See, my granddaughter is 1/4 African American, 1/4 American Indian, and half South Asian. So her community, her Indian community, the Akimel Othams, they have the highest rate of diabetes in the world as a community.
Yes.
And their life expectancy is 50. But their cousins in the Mexican side of the border, they're perfectly fine. The Akimel Othams are the river people. So they used to have a river come through there, and they used to farm. So they used to raise corn, squash, and beans. But now the river is dry because it was taken upstream before it gets to them. So the government is giving them a box of food.
Junk.
Full of junk.
Yeah.
So they are literally being poisoned.
A similar story to our First Nations people who live in the north. A lot of them don't have access to healthy food. There's a huge economy based on meat production. Should that shift to healthy food addresses that issue of food deserts in Canada as well.
Ultimately, that pollution that we found in Rajasthan, it's everywhere, because Rajasthan, that village was 3 hours from the nearest city. The animals everywhere are sick. They are filled with toxins.
We live in Toronto, and we can talk about the role that animal agriculture plays, and we're seeing things like drought in India, but in Toronto you're not thinking about those people. How do we get people to think more globally and collectively about, yes, like your food choices indirectly is affecting those people, and you should care about that. Because I find that really difficult. We're just so self-centered as a species.
But I would change that story. We are not self-centered as a species, but we are stuck in a system that rewards self-centeredness. So we are sort of taught to be self-centered. We're told that's the only way to survive. And so this is why you tend to see that amplified in our nature. We are also altruistic by nature. If you have a system that amplifies that, you would see more of that.
With genetically modified foods, is that the next battle in the environment? Because there's farmers in India who are fighting against being given Monsanto seeds.
Right.
Is that going to be a contributing factor to kind of the decline of usable lands?
Well, it's going to be a contributing factor to the decline of the current system, because the current system is about maximizing production in the short term, and that's what genetically modified foods do, right? So that it maximizes production in the short term while depleting the soil, and over time you'll have to pour more and more fertilizers to get the same output from that, and the land is also being destroyed in the process. So the fact that the farmers in India are fighting that is a good sign, because that means that they're fighting the current system from expanding into India. Fortunately, India still has a lot of very fertile soil that hasn't been contaminated with glyphosate.
So I just wanted to add that when I travel to Asia, I checked the air quality levels, and they're hazardous in Varanasi, New Delhi, a lot of cities in India, like above 300. Anything above 300 is hazardous. Here in Toronto, it's like minus 50, which is really good. So I realized that I'm very privileged to be born in Canada. So I want to use that power to help and fight for the world. And by traveling, it really opened up my eyes and seeing it for my own self, like seeing the disaster in Borneo with the palm oil plantations and just palm trees everywhere. Like the whole island's going to be covered in palm, like the next 10 years or less probably. But yeah, it's going beyond being like helping in other ways, like reducing plastic and not buying palm products.
Well, we have to completely overturn the system.
Yes.
I mean, it has to be a new system.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
But you never change things by fighting the existing reality. This is what Buckminster Fuller said. To change something, you have to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So we have to focus on building that new system, where right from the outset you say this kind of processes will not be allowed. Yes.
So the common thread is clear throughout this whole conversation. The problem or the problems are global. We need local solutions, but we also need regional and global solutions. The problem I have is envisioning the transition from what we have now to something truly global.
Right.
Earlier you used the examples of the internet 20-some years ago and gay rights 10, 12 years ago in the United States specifically. I thought when you said that it's a good example, but most of the world still does not recognize gay rights.
Right.
And in fact, many places are very violent against those seen as others. And so we are fighting not only individual attitudes and beliefs and apathy, selfishness, and greed.
Right.
We're fighting giant, powerful systems. Corporations, you mentioned it already. These corporations didn't get so big and powerful just because.
Right.
Again, greed. And so these corporations go to any means to gain more power and profits and to grow, to take more. Greed knows no bounds. And when it's cultivated, it can take over everything. So I always have difficulty envisioning that transition. How do we get over that giant hump?
I'll give you an example of Gandhi. Gandhi came to India in 1915. He was a lawyer when he came to India. He had actually written a book called Hind Swaraj in 1909. And when the British government banned that book, it became very popular. So that's how Gandhi became very well known in India, because everybody was printing that book and reading it. So he traveled the villages of India for 3 years, understanding how to deal with the British. He wanted to get the British out of India. And he focused on the largest industry in England at that time, the textile industry. So he convinced people of India not to buy textiles from Britain, but to rather spin their own yarn, make their own clothes. And so he started the Khadi movement in 1919. By 1931, the British government was on its knees begging to negotiate with him. Until then, they thought he was a half-naked fakir doing his own thing. They didn't care about him, right? Suddenly he showed the might of the consumer, right? And so the British government was on its knees. Currently, the biggest industry that's affecting all of us is the food industry. It has the largest footprint on Earth. It's using up 45% of the land area of the planet. Okay? 35% of it, 35% of the land area of the planet is used just to graze animals. 10% is for croplands. So if we go vegan, and if we accelerate this movement, the vegan movement, you will have the biggest impact on the largest industry in this current system. And the thing about capitalism is that everything has to grow. The British textile industry didn't just disappear. It just stopped growing, and that was enough to kill it. It is not as difficult as we think. We just have to make it stop growing. This is why they are so scared of what's happening to the dairy industry right now, because it is not growing. So if it doesn't grow, people just stop putting money into it, the whole thing collapses. So we have that power, but we have to have an alternative for people to just come and adopt. If we don't have an alternative, then we'll be causing chaos. So this is why we have to work on an alternative. And I'm saying, I use St. Francis of Assisi, had a beautiful quote. He said, you first start by doing what is necessary, then what is possible, and suddenly you're doing the impossible.
Yeah, I never thought I'd go vegan.
It's a step, okay? That's a step. It's not the end point. But we have to have a system in which veganism is normal.
I know we all want more and more vegans, but I sometimes wonder if trying to create more vegans or putting most of our energies into doing that is necessarily the best use of our time. I question myself, even though I'm active in promoting veganism and animal rights. If most people in the world significantly reduce their meat consumption, wouldn't that also disrupt the system to the point where it collapsed? And might that be easier to achieve than simply increasing the number of vegans? In other words, increasing the consumption of vegan food around the world would have the same impact, maybe quicker.
That's the way it is happening, okay? So like when we ask that question of people and they realize that they have to go vegan, or that they have to come into alignment with who they really are, it starts a process in their mind where they have to find their own way home. Everyone is trying to come home. Everyone is trying to come home to who they really are. But they're all in different places. The best we can do as vegans is to help people when they ask us questions. Based on our experience, how can they come home? It'll be through reduction in consumption that it's going to happen. But no matter how the collapse happens, we have to have an alternate system in place. That to me is the number one thing that I have to work on. What is this alternate system? Just like the internet. In the internet, we came up with ways to connect computers together without needing a big boss computer. It was all distributed system protocol. So any new computer can come along and connect to the internet and become a new node and participate in routing the requests. So that allowed the internet to grow organically. And we need to create something similar, because right now what we have is a very hierarchical system. And we know that Mr. Trump is doing something, clearly anybody can do his job, right? The way he's acting. And he's just a figurehead, but it's still a top-down hierarchical system.
You made a statement that the whole world will go vegan by 2026. I've been all over Asia, and it's just not introduced at all there. But I come back here, and it's just super huge. And every day I hear people talking about veganism. I honestly believe I think it's going to start in the first world countries like here, then be introduced last world countries there.
They're also picking up faster and faster what's happening around the world.
Because we have more access to the internet. I think social media plays a huge role into saving this planet.
Did you get a sense that there was a lot of American influence? It'd probably be more in the cities.
Yeah, there was definitely influence from America, for sure.
Because even though a lot of the increase in consumption and increase in population is going to be outside of North America, there's a lot of eyes on their lifestyles equated with prosperity. So part of what we can do is to rewrite that story and set a good example for those emerging middle classes that want to eat like Americans. Make veganism cool.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that's how it's going to grow. That's how it is growing. If you look at where veganism is rising fastest, it's in all the rich countries of the world, right? But people in India are, for instance, I know that they are experiencing the pains of growth much faster than we did in America. So 20 years when they went from sedentary society to a society which has huge amounts of diabetes. So they are learning very fast as well. They're saying, it wasn't there 20 years ago, right? So suddenly you have cancer up the wazoo, you have diabetes, and heart disease. So they're learning too. They're saying, okay, maybe it's the food.
We know that reducitarianism is going to be a part of that transition to this new vegan world. Inconvenient Truth didn't talk about agriculture at all. An Inconvenient sequel is coming out soon, and it'll probably have a bit of a reductionist message to it. The NGOs are starting to talk about it. The Cowspiracy is kind of just revealing itself more by talking about it as little as possible. Is it important to promote a vegan agenda and say, it's vegan, guys. It's not reducing, it's not anything less?
No, we have to be clear on the end goal. We have to be compassionate towards those who are making the transition towards the end goal. But we never compromise on the end goal. The end goal is full liberation for all of us. Okay? So it's liberation for the animals and liberation for us too.
Well, is the anthropocentrism a little bit of an obstacle in this objective? Even the climate crisis, they're thinking in human terms, what is going to happen to cities.
Right.
And ignoring the fact that there's a mass extinction in process. And at the end of the day, we're an animal and a species on the chopping block.
Right, this is the biodiversity laws, the Convention on Biological Diversity. That is addressing this. So they went from 2010 saying they're going to halt biodiversity loss to 2020 as the new goal. And then 2020 is coming and there is no progress towards that goal. So now they're talking about 2030, which they will definitely accomplish that by 2030 because there'll be nothing left. Right, if we continue doing this. So we have to change. And we have to now become cognizant of the other species. In fact, we are here to serve them. The environmental community is focusing just on climate change. Right? They're not focusing on these other problems.
Right.
So when we look at all three problems, any scientist will tell you that the number one thing you need to do is to go vegan. If you want to address biodiversity loss and ecosystems collapse and climate change. So it's broadening their outlook, broadening the framework in which we are looking at the environmental issues.
I mean, I'm hoping along with this, capitalism goes by the wayside. I guess I'm only thinking co-ops and collective growing, collective buying. But
Right.
I mean, is in your vegan world, is there another way of doing things?
Well, these are all the things that we need to work out. What does the new system look like, right?
Yeah.
And there are lots of options like that, where people have been trying. There are lots of experiments happening around the world in cooperatives, new forms of capitalism, blockchain technology.
Bitcoin or?
It's like Bitcoin. Blockchain technology is the basis of Bitcoin, and it allows transactions to happen and trust networks to be built that are decentralized and infinite in size.
Oh, wow.
Okay? So you don't need a bank anymore.
Right.
Literally. So you don't need a central authority to ensure trust. So you can trust anyone on that network.
But it can be hacked.
The only hacking that has happened has been not on the core protocol. It's only happened at the input. So some computer that's storing this stuff.
Doesn't your Ahimsa coin model also solve poverty at the same time? And that's obviously a nice little side effect.
So the Ahimsa coin idea, the concept, is to use something like Bitcoin, but rather than having just a fixed number of Bitcoins, Ahimsa coin is issued to every member once every 50 minutes. A new coin appears in your account. Okay? And the idea is that each coin then is associated with 1 square meter of the Earth's surface productivity for 1 year. So it's an ecological footprint measure. So this guarantees that if the whole world lives within this Ahimsa coin economy, human beings won't use more than half the Earth. If we are honest about our accounting.
You're right.
Okay? So now we have to account for the true cost of everything in terms of ecological footprint. But there is feedback, so we can actually look at what's happening on Earth and make sure that we are not using more than half the Earth. That's your overall feedback. So the other half has to be given back to wildlife, right? So that makes sure that your system is robust. There's feedback, and then as population grows, your Ahimsa coin frequency decreases. So instead of once every 50 minutes, you will get 1 every 51 minutes. So you get feedback on population as well. And it builds inequality right from the outset because everybody is getting 1 every 50 minutes. And now you can create capitalism within this framework. Someone has a bright idea and says, I want to create this product. They have to collect enough Ahimsa coins from investors so that they can retire that when they use up the earth to create that product. Okay? So why would anyone create a product? Because they want to contribute. So it's selflessness that drives it. Otherwise, you can just sit back and say, I'm getting my coins, I'll eat, right? But people want to contribute. No one wants to sit. We have found that out. We have a community kitchen in Phoenix, where it's just volunteers who wash dishes, who set the table, who wash the floor, who sweep the floor. And we have never had a dearth of volunteers. And no one would do that job if I offered them $5 an hour to do it. But everyone volunteers to do it for free. So people do want to contribute to a community when they are part of a community. Okay, that we know that. So that's the basis of this new system.
You're calling it constrained capitalism, but this ahimsa coin every 50 minutes implies that nobody has got survival as their main priority anymore. It's taking care of everybody, which has to be the most communist idea. You've talked about your community where you're having people living in groups. That sounds very commune-oriented. It's kind of like taking the best of communism and the things that actually work about capitalism and addressing things that are the worst about capitalism. Get rid of the banks, get rid of the invented interest.
Right. So that's the idea. Because we now know how to create large networks of trust with the blockchain technology. That's the basis of this new system. So you can have a distributed system. So you don't have to have a big boss telling us what to do.
I'm in March, 2 months ago, there were different environmental groups, and basically people who didn't join our side, they were mentioning that conspiracy is full of factual errors. Were there any corrections made? Are they on the website? Because I recommend conspiracy to a lot of people. I'd like to know if any corrections were made.
Yeah, I can tell you that when Leonardo DiCaprio, before he became executive producer of Cowspiracy, he went through every fact in that documentary. And the most contentious fact was the 51%. That's the main criticism that you get. Because they use the breathing contribution of cattle that shouldn't have used because everybody breathes. And I said, look at that number. Is that an excess biomass on the planet as far as animals are concerned? So everything that they're eating is an excess that's going out of the planet. If we had 200 million metric tons of biomass of animals on the planet, then their breathing contribution is in balance with the rest. Right? It's part of the ecosystem. But when you start adding more and more and more, and you know that the land is being deforested and desertified, how are you accounting for that? How are you accounting for the desertification? There's a lot of carbon that disappeared when grassland became desert, right? They're not accounting for that right now. So one way to account for it is to look at the breathing contribution of the animals that are living.
So what
contribution? The breathing contribution.
Breathing.
Yeah. Haven't some people argued, though, the Great Plains in North America, that there were billions of bison? That's still that?
Yeah.
Okay. So even though there were so many, it still wasn't compared to the number of cows?
Nothing like what we're doing now. Yeah.
Where does pets play a factor into this?
Which one?
Pets, like dogs and cats. I mean, you've got.
They're tiny compared to this. Yeah. They're about 90 million or something like that. But they're big, but they're not as.
So there's more pets than there are wildlife animals on this planet.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
That's
right.
And you're just talking about megafauna, but if we included all the invertebrates and the smaller animals, would that still make much of a difference? Or?
Our farmed animals overwhelm.
Still overwhelm.
This is in my book, and I have all the references to scientific papers that I got these numbers from. So the original number, this 200 million metric tons, human biomass, we just calculate 68 kgs times 7.4 billion or 7 billion, whatever the population was.
In carbon yogurt?
Yeah, in carbon yogurt.
So this chart is not available online anywhere?
In our paper that we presented at the AGU, we have these numbers. The original paper is by Professor Anthony Barnowski of Berkeley, and it's in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences from 2008. And then I used the World Wildlife Fund's 52% reduction to point out what happened to wild animals, because he hadn't broken it all up.
I'm old enough to remember the Club of Rome,
right?
And in the 70s, I think it was the 70s, and their predictions of limits to growth,
right?
Technological improvements, increased efficiencies at a cost, no doubt, to the earth, seemed to overcome the limits to growth, or made it appear that we overcome. And I even think further back to Malthus and his predictions of saying that there were limits to productivity of the soil.
Right.
And it seems that every time we that someone says is a limit, we seem to exceed it. Is there a danger that we've got it wrong?
So that's why I waited.
Yes.
2 years before I went public with what I'm talking about now. Because I got alarmed in 2014. I waited 2 years to see what was happening with the wild animals. And my prediction is that they're going to zero by 2026. That's why I'm saying 2026. Now it turns out that the limits to growth predictions were actually dead on. So they had several scenarios. One of the scenarios was dead on with what has happened since 1970. In that prediction, by 2026 we were going to go again into a collapse. In that prediction. And all the figures match what has happened. Between 1970 and 2000 it has matched. So a professor in Australia did that analysis in 2010. He looked at all the World Bank data and the UN data and plotted it against the predictions from the limits to growth, and it falls right on it. He wrote a paper about that. And that scenario does collapse in 2026. So everything seems to be pointing to that number. I mean, you cannot dispute what's happening to wild animals. They are dying in front of our eyes. Right? So what Malthus said was about soil. Right? What happened in the 1960s was also about soil. They were saying we're going to deplete the soil. But then they came up with chemicals, fertilizers to put it in there, right? So that's what happened with Malthus. So we came up with the Haber-Bosch process for fixing nitrogen. But in the process, we have just added nitrogen, so made the plants grow, but the other nutrients are depleting. We didn't worry about them, right? So now they're all almost gone. And then in the 1960s, we said, well, let's pump water from underground and pour it on the top so that you don't have to wait for rain. So that's how we increase productivity. And in the process, again, if you look at what we do with animal agriculture, we are now collecting food from the land, taking it to the animals and feeding them, and then we don't know what to do with all the poop.
Yeah.
Okay? So it's a completely unsustainable process because the nutrients are disappearing from the land, brought to one place, and then it's being flushed into the ocean.
Some people say, oh, agriculture is a solution to the depleting wild fish stocks. And yet we find we're collecting fish, wild fish, and feeding them to fish. It's like the same problem. Same technological fix, it seems, right. Or attempted fix.
Right. It's not a fix. We know it's not a fix because you're not closing the loop. Right? It's not a fix. It's a one. When you don't close the loop, you know it is going to end at some point.
So Sailesh, you were talking about how you see this transformation of us into a butterfly, even if it gets to the point where there's like no wildlife left. If it's just humans left, how do we thrive with them all gone?
I don't expect it to get to zero. This is why I'm going around talking to people all around the world right now, because we need to accelerate this side. We need to accelerate the growth of the vegan community. We stop this destruction before they get to zero.
We have less than 10 years for elephants and they're extinct. And Hong Kong just did the largest discovery of ivory in history, like a couple days ago, I think. It just seems hopeless.
This is why you need that new system, because why are people killing elephants?
See, desperation.
Yeah.
Desperation. They don't have any money, and they see an elephant, they see a walking $1,000 bill, right? Yeah. So they're going to kill that elephant because some rich fellow somewhere says, I want my ivory carvings. And I'm willing to pay thousands of dollars for it. And he doesn't know that the forest died to make that happen. So it's that disconnection, this inequality, this gross inequality that's causing all this destruction. So you need to build this new system where people say, I want to be there and not here, and this whole thing collapses. Then the people who have lots of money are going to be sitting with lots of pieces of paper with pictures of dead presidents on them. I tell people, have faith. Because I always worried about the other side. I always thought, oh my God, look at all the bad things that are happening. And then once my granddaughter pulled me out and showed me from the other side, I saw a pattern, I saw a story, that everything does fit. That we are in the process of being woken up. Okay? And I see it. I see that pattern too. It's beautiful. The pattern of the butterfly.
When's the new documentary coming out, The Cow Spiritual?
They're working very hard on it, trying to interview a lot of religious leaders. It's hoping by the middle of next year.
Can you give us a tiny taste of what might be some?
Have you seen The Compassion Project? No. So The Compassion Project was another documentary that we supported. And it is like Cow Spiritual, but it is not confrontational. It's not about catching people doing bad things. So it's about talking to people, talking to faith leaders, and then asking them about diet, and then asking them if they would take a 30-day vegan challenge. And usually they all say yes, we'll do it, because they realize they have to do it. And then he's going to interview them afterwards, after they do it. So Thomas Jackson is doing that documentary, and and he's planning to release it by the beginning of next year. So there'll be at least 2 documentaries like that coming out next year.
How about the atheists? Are they included somehow in the documentary? Atheists?
Yeah, absolutely.
Atheism is a religion too.
See, anyone.
The broader definition of a religion, a way of life that has an ideology, whether it be, agnosticism, you say would not be a religion because it's not a commitment to a position, whereas atheism is a commitment to a position.
What position?
The position of atheism, of there being no God.
Or no single God.
Paul York and I talked about this at length. He is a philosopher of religion, and he said to me that animal rights can be construed as a religion, and that atheism can be construed as a religion. In the broader sense of
There's no doctrine they follow. You don't have a doctrine.
You don't need to have dogma to have a spirituality.
Can it be part of this discussion?
See, it's all about compassion for all creation. And there are atheists who sign that too. Buddhists consider themselves to be atheists. They don't believe in a God. They say that compassion for all creation is fundamental to our religion. In fact, Phoenix, we have quite a few atheists who come to our meetings.
The religious leaders because they have a lot of influence. So
Right.
in what way, like in the upcoming documentaries, in what way are you including the atheists since they're not organized, right?
No, there are secular humanists.
There's Facebook groups with atheists that you can go in and speak about
Oh,
veganism.
I have an idea. Yeah, we're atheists, our family, and we were married by a humanist, so I do have researched those people, but still, I was wondering in the documentary, maybe you can't tell me.
I have no idea, because I'm just an executive producer. They are going around interviewing. They ask me something, I answer. If they want to interview me, I let them interview me.
Where can we buy your book?
It's right here. Or you can buy it on Amazon. Carbon Yoga and Carbon Dharma.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So keep the faith.
Or no faith.
Have faith in each other. We are going to